In the 1950s, air travel was a thriving business in America, which was going through an economic boom with a significant swell of the middle class. Today, flying is considered the safest mode of transportation thanks to modern planes with all the bells and whistles and advanced radar and traffic control systems. Back in the 50s, however, things looked rather different. Pilots had to be in control of where they were in relation to other aircraft in the area. Sometimes, though, those aircraft weren't noticed until it was too late. It was June 30th, 1956, and numerous passengers were waiting to board their flights at Los Angeles International Airport. Two of the planes taking off that day were Trans World Airlines Flight 2 and United Airlines Flight 718. TWA Flight 2 had undergone some minor maintenance that morning, leading to a 31-minute delay in their scheduled departure, but the flight was safely cleared to fly. 41-year-old Captain Jack Gandy was flying the plane, with First Officer James Rittner and Flight Engineer Forrest Brayfogle assisting him on the flight from LAX to Kansas City, Kansas. Gandy was an experienced pilot with over 15,000 hours under his belt. He had piloted this same route almost 200 times. When the aircraft took off at 9:01 a.m. with 64 passengers and 6 crew on board, it seemed this flight would be no different. United Flight 718 took off around 3 minutes later at 9:04 a.m. First Officer Robert Harms and Flight Engineer Gerard Fiore accompanied 48-year-old Captain Robert Shirley. Like Gandy, Captain Shirley was a well-traveled pilot with 17,000 flight hours to his name. 5 crew were on board with 53 passengers. At first, the aircraft set off in different directions. TWA Flight 2 flew northeast towards Daggett, California, at an authorized altitude of 19,000 feet or 5,800 meters. Once over Daggett, Captain Gandy turned right towards Trinidad, Colorado. United Flight 718 had flown directly east to Palm Springs before turning north towards Needles, California. Now, Captain Shirley was flying straight on to Durango in southwestern Colorado. Each aircraft's route now took them both directly over Grand Canyon National Park. In 1956, aircraft couldn't communicate directly with air traffic controllers. Instead, they spoke to their company radio operators who would then pass the information on to relevant control centers. At 9:21 a.m., TWA Flight 2 asked to climb to 21,000 feet to get above some weather building over Arizona. The message was relayed to the Los Angeles controller, who radioed to the Salt Lake City controller responsible for northern Arizona's airspace and asked for his opinion. Quote, TWA-2 is requesting 21,000. How does that look? The LA controller asked. Quote, I see he is Daggett Direct Trinidad. I see you have United 718 crossing his altitude, in his way at 21,000. The Salt Lake City controller confirmed the planes were crossing paths, which meant that TWA-2 could not climb to 21,000 feet, the same altitude that United 718 was at. The Los Angeles controller reported back to the radio operator for Trans World Airlines and told him that TWA-2's request was denied. The operator then changed his request, now saying Captain Gandy was requesting, quote, 1,000 on top, meaning he wanted to fly 1,000 feet above the clouds. This practice is no longer done today, as when that type of request was approved, it effectively gave the pilot free rein to fly at whatever altitude was away from the clouds. On June 30th, 1956, 1,000 feet above the clouds happened to be 21,000 feet, the same height that Captain Gandy was denied to climb up to. Since his request for 1,000 on top was fairly standard back then, it was cleared. The information was passed back to Captain Gandy with the additional detail that United 718 was cruising at 21,000 feet. Blissfully unaware of the upcoming disaster, United 718 and TWA-2 continued eastward into the Salt Lake Flight Advisory area. United 718 passed over Needles at 9:58 a.m. at 21,000 feet. The crew estimated they would be over the Painted Desert Line at 10:31 a.m. That would be their next check-in point. Due to a technical malfunction, that information was only passed on to the Salt Lake controller at 10:13 a.m. At 9:59 a.m., only a minute after United 18's correspondence, TWA-2 communicated it was flying over Lake Mojave at 21,000 feet, and that it would be passing over the Painted Desert Line at 10:31 a.m. This is where it all started to go wrong, since that technical issue meant that United 718's report only reached the Salt Lake controllers at 10:13 a.m. They did not yet know of United's estimated time of crossing when TWA's report came in at 10:01 a.m., despite it being the second report of the two. United 718 and TWA-2 were traveling at the same altitude and expected to both reach the Painted Desert Line at 10:31 a.m. Still, the Salt Lake controller didn't sound the alarm, and for fair enough reason. The Painted Desert Line was not a minute stretch of land. It extends 175 miles, roughly 280 kilometers, and the planes could be crossing over at any part of it. Since they were in uncontrolled airspace, it was the pilot's job to keep their aircraft separate from others in the sky. By some twist of fate, United 718 and TWA were both flying slightly north of their most direct route. We can only speculate why that was, but many experts believe it was to give the passengers on board a closer look at the Grand Canyon. The other possibility was that both pilots deviated north to avoid storms brewing with thunderheads reaching up to 30,000 feet. Regardless, the weather was not ideal that day for viewing much of the Grand Canyon or, more importantly, for seeing each other in the sky. Due to the limited information in the moments leading up to the collision, we don't know if United 718 saw TWA-2 ahead of them, and if they did, it's not clear how much time they had to react. We do know that between 10:30 and 10:31 a.m., TWA-2 was slammed into by United 718, with United's left wingtip striking TWA's center tail fin. United's propeller tore into TWA's rear baggage compartment. The collision took place in less than a second, but did irreparable damage to both aircraft. TWA-2 was now in a direct nosedive heading straight for the treacherous canyon floor. Passengers and debris littered the sky as it plunged from 21,000 feet, finally slamming upside down into the hillside over the Colorado River. Everyone on board died instantly on impact. Directly following the collision, United 718 was missing a significant portion of its left wing. It was sent into a spiral, with First Officer Harms able to squeeze out one frantic final message. Quote, "Salt Lake area, 718, we are going in." Captain Shirley was heard screaming in the background for the plane to be pulled up. Unfortunately, the damage was too severe and it was far too late. United 718 crashed onto the rocky projection of Schwar Butte, a prominent summit in the canyon. The passengers and crew suffered the same fate as their TWA counterparts. It wasn't until both planes failed to announce their cross over the Painted Desert Line and were unreachable by radio that concerns began to mount. A search and rescue mission was launched, but where to start was the first question. No one had witnessed the crash, and the planes had no radio records in the lead-up to the collision. A sighting of two smoke plumes earlier that day gave them their first lead. The Hudgen brothers who saw the smoke took their light aircraft out to where they believed they originated from after hearing of the missing planes. As night fell, they spotted TWA's triple tail on the hillside where it fell. Due to the treacherous nature of the terrain where the planes landed, particularly United 718, investigations into what happened were made extremely difficult. A United States Army helicopter dropped off Civil Aeronautics Board investigators at the site of TWA-2. The back portion of the aircraft lay at the base of Temple Butte. United 718 was a different story. A helicopter was able to land on a ledge and confirm there were no survivors, but it was not permitted to return. Instead, a highly trained Swiss mountain rescue team was brought in. They scaled Schwar Butte's sheer face and arrived at what was left of the aircraft. Most of what was left on the plane was still on the ledge where it landed, but the rest of the wreckage trailed off over the 985-foot or 300-meter cliff. It was clear from the devastation that no one aboard could have survived. The 1956 Grand Canyon mid-air collision was the first air disaster where over 100 lives were lost. When the news broke about the horrific incident, people wanted answers. The in-depth investigation that followed uncovered the failings that allowed the incident to happen. It took some time for real changes to be made as well as other collisions and near misses, but in 1958 the Federal Aviation Act was passed. That saw the Civil Aeronautics Administration, which was in charge of air traffic control for the United States but had no control over military flights, be dissolved and the Federal Aviation Administration created in its place. The FAA took over total control of American airspace, including military activity. The birth of the FAA and modernizing of technology meant that collisions became far less frequent. Unfortunately, it is often the case that tragedies like these spark the changes that make life safer for those left behind, but that will never justify losing those 128 lives in such a horrific way. Just remember the next time you board a plane that it was the deaths of many before you that made flying the safest way to travel. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.